Well, hello and welcome to the Edgewood 4G podcast. My name is Kyle Parks. I'm the Discipleship pastor here. And today I'm joined with Chris Rogers, our youth pastor. It's in the house.
Yeah.
How you feeling today, man?
Dude, I need some caffeine.
Well, what are we doing drinking water here?
I know. Dave didn't bring us any coffee. So.
He's drinking coffee back there, laughing at us.
And not sharing.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Well, it's a joy to be on here. Coming up, weekly. We've been doing this. And last week, I was with Micah, your assistant.
Micah rocked it.
He did. And so what we did last week, we had started basically a conversation about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, these up-and-coming generations. And, there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we should have you on since you are the youth pastor. And we can continue that conversation today.
All right.
So today we have a Gen Xer and a millennial that are going to talk about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So,
are you the typical millennial though? Do you
in what way? I don't think I am.
The quintessential millennial. Is that you, or you think you're? I feel you're a little more Gen X-y than that.
Yeah, I'm close to where you were, but
where I was. Wait, what's that mean?
you're up there a little more.
I think that's an old joke.
Anyways, we gotta get this thing going. But anyways, thanks for joining us. So why don't we start by talking about this past weekend, Chris? You guys had Youth Weekend. We do this every year at the beginning of May, where students kind of help lead in a lot of areas you preached. And so how do you think this weekend went?
Yeah, it's exciting. I love Youth Weekend. It's an opportunity for the students really just to step up into those leadership roles. Yeah. And that's one big thing that I want to do with our students is, Edgewood, I love that they don't see the student ministry or their students as like the future of the church, but they see them as the church. Yeah. But now it's like, okay, well then if that's the case, if they're part of the church now, then how are you serving? Because that's part of being in the church, right? Yeah. And so our students stepping up and serving. I loved preaching. I'll be honest, I walked into preaching that sermon and I was like, man, I don't know if this is the right sermon for this weekend. But man, it was so good. Later on, we'll get talking about how we meet students and when they feel, and I think it was the right sermon because of that. And so we'll touch on that piece of it. But no, I love being part of a church that Brian trusts the crazy youth pastor to preach, right? Yeah. And not every church is that way.
And he was out of town even.
Well, maybe that was why I was able to do it. But so it's cool in terms of that. Yeah. But my favorite part of Youth Weekend by far is senior blessings. Yeah. When all of a sudden, you have parents that are speaking the blessing over their graduating senior. I've had students before tell me like, this is the first time my dad ever told me he loved me, or this is the first time that my parents ever told me they're proud of me. Wow. And so I'm like, man, we need to really combat against that and make even these blessings that you're speaking, the truths you're speaking over your students a little more common. Yeah. But, yeah. That's
really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was a fantastic weekend and heard tons of great comments just on the student ministry band and just how good they sound. Right? And even for people who are musicians themselves and singers, they're like, they did an excellent job. So yeah. It's very good. Yeah. Very good. Well, last week with Micah, we kind of started talking about these different generations. We talked about revival in these generations. We talked about a digital fast that we're doing in the young adults ministry. And this was a really cool thing on Sunday night. We had a big group of Mainspringers outside. It was a beautiful evening. We had Whiteys. So
that sounds like amazing.
It just makes it even better. But I did a devotion and was just doing some prepared stuff on teaching and leading others, and kind of discipleship. Before that, I said, hey, how's everybody doing with the digital fast? Taking some time away from your phones, or at least certain apps and things of that nature. And I just said, hey, maybe a couple people share. I thought it'd be a minute or two. It went on for 5-10 minutes.
Oh, really?
And just all around, just people sharing, people doing it that I didn't even know, or getting a lot out of it, a lot more out of it than I thought. And so... yeah, it's really turned into a pretty remarkable thing, I think, and just people talking about how they're sharing their faith more, they're growing in their faith, they're spending more time with God, they're being more intentional. Yeah. They're aware of things going on around them because they're not looking down.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was really cool. So, maybe this can just be kind kind of experiment with our young adults ministry, but maybe you could try it in the student ministry. Maybe we could bring it to the whole church and just say, hey, here's some testimonies of how this helped this ministry, but I want to keep a good thing going. So that was really cool that we got to talk about.
Did they talk about building new relationships as a result from that? Was that one piece that they touched on? I always find that people, when they're in uncomfortable situations, they'll get their phone out almost like this is a wall, like I'm safe behind this. And then they complain. They're like, well, I don't have any friends.
Right.
And so I didn't know.
Well, I did hear people say, like they're talking to people more just in general, like especially if like they're out in public, that kind of thing. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I've seen more relationships growing in that group as it is as well.
Yeah.
So, it was very, very cool. So here's a question we want to start with and kind of continuing this conversation, Chris, is this: how do you reach a generation, and I've heard this quoted before from some pastor, how do you reach a generation that listens with its eyes and thinks with its feelings? What do you do with that?
I think that's good, and I appreciate you admitting that it was a smarter pastor than you that came up with that. So even going back to the sermon that was preached this last weekend, that's the reason that I tackled Psalm 42 is we've got to understand that our feelings isn't the motivation part, right? And so how do we, because if it is, then all of a sudden when my soul's downcast, right? Like in Psalm 42, it means that the world's fallen apart. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, right? It's not my feelings that are leading my faith. It's right. It's my soul. It's all of me that's moving forward in my faith. And so I think we've got to help students. I think all people really, we've got to begin to understand that, it's not our feelings as the driving force, because all of a sudden when that's what we base everything on, our faith really just falls apart when life gets hard. And in our culture, I think specifically, everything is we're supposed to be healthy and we're supposed to be wealthy and right. And so if I have a hurt, I'm not supposed to sit in my suffering. I'm supposed to run from it. And so I have a pill that I take and so we definitely live in a culture that's anti-suffering, right? But Scripture tells us we will suffer. And so what do we do with that then when we begin to be in a place of suffering? And if our students aren't prepared for how to work through that suffering, man, then we just oftentimes deconstruct our faith from there. So.
Yeah, and I think coming alongside people and helping them understand, it's not like people's feelings aren't valid. I think God made us with emotions. He made us with feelings. You know, we had, at least when I went to a conference back in the fall, and one of the talks was on that. Just talking about, hey, we've gone so far the other way in the sense of your feelings don't matter at all. In the church, because the culture is very much all about feelings. To, just telling people, well, your feelings aren't really valid. They don't really matter. Well, no, God made us that way. They do. But we don't want to be driven by them. We don't want to be, we don't want them to be the driving force between everything that we do. Especially when it comes to our relationship with God. Because then some days our relationship with God will be great because things are going well. And then what happens when, something bad happens that day? Well, then it's all God's fault. Or, God, why'd you do this to me? How could you let this happen? That kind of thing. Because we base it all on those kinds of things. So, trying to find that balance, though.
Student ministry. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it 100 times with Camp High that students get. And they all of a sudden, they have this amazing experience. And it's this Camp High that they have, that there's an emotional response attached to, I believe, a spiritual moment. But, and so they're like, I feel so close to God. But then all of a sudden, once they kind of get back into the normal and they come off that Camp High, then what do they do with that? Because God still is present that day as what he was a week previously. So what do you do with that? And it's understanding, that our feelings are valid. But man, it's not what's driving me. It's not my feelings is why I'm pursuing Jesus. It's because he's who he says he is.
Yeah, and I think encouraging people to continue to gather together, because so much of what we're missing in our culture is good, strong community and relationships that come from being gathered together as the body of Christ, as the church. And relationships in the church are different than that of the culture. It's deeper. It's more spiritual. And so, yes, you are going to feel something different when you gather with God's people because of what you're there for and who you're worshiping. So encouraging people to continue that, and that's going to help you to grow and your faith for sure.
I was reading an article that was actually really encouraging. It was talking Gen Z specific, but it was saying like even Gen Z is looking and they're like, we know this is a superficial world, right? Like we know social media is superficial and so that they're really craving something authentic. And so this article was like, make sure your church is authentic. Make sure your church gives them space to be able to see that life isn't perfect and that you're not perfect, but that you're okay.
Yeah. That's huge, especially with this generation being real, sharing what's really going on in your life, sharing the highs and the lows, not acting like you got it all together, sharing your mistakes.
Absolutely.
I think that's huge for people to see that. So what are we missing, like with this generation and sharing the gospel and passing on our faith? What do we need to do to contextualize the message for this generation that perhaps we didn't have to do in previous generations? What's different about this generation that we need to do differently to help reach them with the gospel?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is we need to meet them where they're at, right? And so it's easy to kind of get in this place and you're like, no, like they need to come here. We need to meet students where they're at in life. And so I think we're taking right here as a platform that honestly we're doing that with, we're meeting people with technology. And when you listen to how many people listen to podcasts, it's crazy. Yeah. And so this is a great way to be able to reach people. So I think that's one of them is we're meeting with them where they're at, that we have to be authentic. I want students, even through discipleship, through the groups that I've had specifically in discipleship, I'm like, I want you to come to my house and have dinner with me because I want you to see that I'm the same guy at youth group as what I am when I'm home with my kids, as when I'm tucking my daughter into bed, right? Like those when she was younger. Right. So,
right.
But I want to invite them into my life so they can see an authentic view of who I am, and that, man, I just want to be the same guy everywhere.
Yeah.
And that I'm pursuing Jesus, not just a facade while I'm here in church or on the streets, but I'm the same guy at home too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, we have people in our house often. We love to show hospitality.
Yeah.
But you're going to get a real picture for what it's like to have 4 kids in a crazy house with a lot going on.
Yeah.
And it's not always pretty, You're going to see crying kids. You're going to see, discipline taking place. You're going to see meltdowns.
Yeah.
There's going to be those types of things that are real life, and you're going to see us frustrated at times. But I think if we're going to be real with people, we invite them to every aspect of our life.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the best kind of discipleship that you can give for people. Yeah, you can meet over a Bible study. You can meet over a class or a group, which is great. But invite people into your life and to bring them along with what you're doing. Like, take them to the store with you. Take them to work with you. Like, do normal life with them so they can see your life and how you interact with people and situations. I think that's huge. That's
I agree. And so, right. And so, I think we almost overcomplicate this sometimes. And we're like, okay, like what is the special thing that we have to do to be able to reach people with the gospel? And we're like, man, the power's in the gospel, right? We just have to be obedient in living it out ourselves and then in sharing that, right? And being an example. And so, I don't know that there's some special solution to it other than if you look over the past 2,000 years, like that's what they did, right?
Yeah.
So, I want students to understand that I still struggle. I want students to understand that but I'm pursuing Jesus through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like you said, they need to see what our lives are like in real life, and they'll get a glimpse of what it looks like to follow Jesus as a believer and the everyday stuff of life.
Yeah.
And if we bring people alongside us in that endeavor, we'll see like this is real. It's not just their words. It's not as pretty as I thought, kind of thing, but they have struggles too. They have things that they're working through. Then I think they'll get a fuller picture of what it's all about.
Even on the fire department, one of the things is in supporting each other during like those hard calls that we had is what we found out is that when one guy was like, man, that call really bothered me, all of a sudden gives other people permission to be able to say, you know what, it bothered me too. And so when we live that authentic life that you're saying, now all of a sudden other people are willing to be vulnerable and say, like, I got questions about these things, right? How does this work in our faith? Like, right? And just opens a door that we can have some better conversations.
Yeah, and in that cultural context, when something tragic happens, when something bad happens, like taking time to talk about it and not just glossing over, oh, we just need to get to the Bible right away. And we obviously know that's where the answers are, but say, hey, let's talk about this. Let's pray about this situation. Like this thing that happened, this terrorist attack or this other war that broke out. Let's talk about it and let's actually see where you're at with this and how you're processing this, because we can hide things very easily, right?
What?
Right? And so there can be kids that could be coming into youth group and they're really struggling with something they dealt with on social media or on television or the news, and unless you bring it up maybe how it's affected you, then they might not even share about it themselves. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. So here's another question, Chris. What are some practical things that parents and grandparents can do to be more intentional? Like think more with their kids or grandkids. Okay, so we have kids. Your kids are grown. My kids are in the house. What are some things you did, or what are some things you've learned about that we can encourage parents and grandparents to do to be more intentional with discipleship of their kids, their families?
Well, I think one of the big things is you have to be willing to step into the hurt and to the heart of it all, right? Like I've had parents before that I've shared. I'm like, man, like your student shared with me they're going through this, and I feel like you as their parent needs to know this. But the parent, I've had experience on both sides where parents are like, oh, thank you, and they tackle it and they get them counseling or whatever it is. And then I've had other times where parents are just like, oh, he'll be okay. And you're like, don't avoid these things. Be willing to step into the hard and to the messiness of it. But practical things, I love that you bring up practical things. I think one of the ultimate biggest things comes down with phones. And when we were at Summit, one of the speakers at Summit a couple years ago was sharing, and he was like, if you give someone an unrestricted smartphone, you're basically handing them pornography.
Right.
You know, and it's so much bigger than even pornography of all the things that you're handing them. And so as parents, I think the number one thing when it comes to phone is you have to have that restricted on their phones, on computers, on like every social media access. I was reading an article and it was talking that students, now I'm going to give them ideas if they listen to this, but that there were students they caught that were actually using the Bible app. And on the Bible app, you can take a picture for a background for a verse, and they were taking inappropriate pictures, and that way they could share them because their Bible app wasn't restricted by their folks.
Oh, my
And so students are going to figure a way to work around some of this stuff. And so as parents, we just have to be heavily involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't just assume that you know your kid and that
totally.
Oh, they're a good kid. They would never do that. Okay.
You remember growing up.
Oh, man. Come on. So, they're just, have a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to our kids. Okay, so think about this. You might have a good kid, whatever. These things will find them. They might not go looking for them, but they'll find them. And then in that instance, they're being tempted. It talks about with teenagers, even young adults, with the research and brain development, all of that, a male's brain doesn't stop developing until 25? So they're going to be making poor decisions, not thinking about the consequences of their actions well into their 20s.
And that's a like physiological thing, right? It's they're physically incapable to some degree of making a good decision because their brain just isn't developed.
Yeah. So it's just some good stuff to think about. Yeah. Some stuff, I think about with my kids and my family, just being present, with your kids. When you come home, when they come home from school or you come home from work, you want to just take a break and rest and relax or turn on the TV or whatever, but just dig a little deeper, be present with them. That's when they want to spend that time with you, especially the younger they are, I think. And just being with them, showing them attention, have fun and be creative with your kids. Come on, you can watch a show together, a movie, whatever, but be creative, like create something together. Do some art projects together, do some fun painting things. I like to make videos with my kids, and we just enjoy that kind of creative outlet together. I try to. I wish it was every night, but just to read to the kids. My older sons are 8 and 10, but they're still at that age where they still enjoy me coming and reading with them and praying with them, but not just praying for them, but teaching them to pray.
Yes.
So that's become, a fun thing at our house over the dinner table. We eat our meals together. Most nights we try to. And a lot of times we have one of the kids pray. Hey, who wants to pray? And see if they volunteer. For a while, Owen, our 3-year-old, it would be him every night. And his prayers were long-winded, and we were hungry.
He's a Parks, huh?
But they were heartfelt. So we wanted to, encourage that. But it was very sweet. And even Chloe now, even though she can barely talk, she's bowing her head and closing her eyes and trying to pray. So it's really cool to see. Exposing your kids to like service projects and missions type trips, those kinds of things. My kids are getting to that age where we're starting to do that a little bit more. Yeah. But finding ways for them to serve together as a family. I can't wait till I start bringing them on missions trips. But again, hospitality, inviting people to our home, letting them see that and letting them be a part of that and play with the kids, but also serve those people there that are at our house. But then getting them to a place where they can lead themselves spiritually. Yes, they're very young right now, but discipling them so that they can lead themselves, so they can get to that point where they want to kind of have time in the Word, where they want to read the Word, where they want to pray, where they want to help grow themselves. It's not just mom and dad saying there's you need to do this, that kind of thing, but get them to that place.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because that's so good. That's so good. Is a couple things that you said. The first thing is just being really intentional. Yeah. I know, again, my kids are grown and doing their own thing at this point.
You have great kids, by the way.
I tend to like them. But it was those times, even just investing, that you're just hanging out playing a board game or doing something creative, that you're really investing in them, that you're building a solid relationship. So then all of a sudden when your kid or your student needs to talk to you, they feel like they can. Yeah, you already had that relationship. I always love taking my kids out backpacking, and it was this time that we'd slow down, and it was amazing the conversations that we would end up having. And it wasn't because I was in Colorado, but it was because we were just being intentional to really slow down and invest in that relationship. And
probably in places like that, it's easier to have a deeper conversation too at times.
Oh, totally.
And asking deeper questions because of the beauty of creation that you're experiencing. There's no there's no distractions. And it's quiet. And,
and both of my kids in those moments have later shared with me. They're like, man, on this trip, I was wrestling with this, and this gave me an opportunity to step away from the problem or whatever, and really to look at my life and be a little introspective. And so, but I say all that to say, like, it takes that initial investing on the front end of playing a board game with them or having just conversation or praying with them at night. And I forgot my second point, but it was going to be really good.
All right. Well, I'll talk and then you can
That's
think
good.
of it.
I'll jump back in.
No, I don't know what I was going to say.
No. Oh, I remember.
Right, I did too.
Hey, but it's the part you're talking about with praying with your kids, but that's you demonstrating. It's not just you're like, you need to go pray, but your kids are watching your life. They're watching the relationship you have between you and Liesel, and they're like, okay, like these are formative years. They're like, okay, well, this is what a husband, how he should treat his wife. This is how a dad or a mom should treat their kid. And so it's such formative times. But you taking and them just watching you in your own quiet time, them watching you with the Bible and studying scripture, them watching you in times of prayer, or even them watching times where like something's heavy on you and that you turn to prayer. Those are just awesome examples for students or kids to be able to see and say, okay, this is the example that's being led for me. This is just normal. This is how we do this.
Yeah, that's really good. And my kids are still young, right? And so, we have people that always share with us, well, wait till they're teenagers, But, I think we're doing everything we can now to invest in them, pay them attention, teach them the word, teach them to pray, like disciple them, doing everything we can now. So hopefully, by God's grace, that when they are teenagers, like, we'll still have a good relationship. And I get it. Like, it's different in every family, and sometimes there are kids that struggle and the parents did everything they could. Mm-hmm. And other times there's kids that were neglected and they turned out great. You don't know. Like, so you pray a lot. You know, I think about growing up and kind of my things, my issues, and with my mom. But I know my mother, like, prayed for us, her kids, daily. Yeah. And I think God answered that prayer for us. And all three of us kids are in ministry, or my brother's an elder in a church, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so, like, not that people have to go into ministry. I'm just saying, like, but following Jesus
is really hard
with whatever job you're doing. Ministry is a lot of work, but it's blessed for sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I've watched you do too, because it's fun with my kids being raised now to sit there and just sit back and just watch you as a dad and how you interact with your kids. But you're building people around you guys as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not just all you, but you're building people around you, your family that are going to encourage you and Liesl as parents, but they're also going to speak the same truth to your kids that you're speaking to them. So you're being intentional with that piece as well.
Yeah. Well, it's been great. It's been a really good conversation. Didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to add before I kind of talk about summer plans for students and young adults, but
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I gave all my wisdom.
You gave it all. That's all
there.
That's all we got. So what's coming up this summer for the students? And then, we'll share about young adults.
Yeah, students. So junior high is going to go up to Camp 4 Springs, and they're going to spend a week up there. We've got even one of your Mainspring guys is on staff up there this summer. So he's one of the counselors. So I'm excited about that piece even. Good. But junior high we're going to take, and we're taking them up there a week, just to step away, right? And just to kind of just hopefully reset and spend some time in nature, spend some time really just getting fed.
Good.
And so I'm excited about that. And then high school, we're going to Belize. Mm-hmm. And, you talk about taking the gospel to the nations. And so that's exactly what we're doing. You and I, you've been there 100 times. I went with you on your last trip down there, but man, it's so cool down there. I love Nehru, Pastor Nehru, and his heart for the people. Yeah. I'm excited that we've got some students that this will be their second time going, and then we've got some students that it's their first time, but the students that it's their second time going, they're just excited to go down. They built some really good relationships down there with some of the other students from Belize, and so the chance to go down there and encourage them again and to share the gospel with them again, and it'd be like, listen, we haven't forgotten about you.
Right.
Like we still pray for you. We still love you. You're still my brother and sister. And we wanted to come down and just encourage you guys again. So I'm excited about the chance.
Yeah, it's great. And we just went there 2 years ago. So to continue those relationships, and it's awesome. I've been going there for years, like you said. And I think that's great when you can invest in one place over many years and just see the fruit of ministry that continues there, and how God's using the church there, but then also how he uses these trips in the lives of students and young adults. So we have quite a few young adults going as well from Mainspring, and so I know they're going to do a fantastic job ministering there, doing VBS for 200-300 kids, however many show up. It's going to be a great time. Yeah.
I mean, I've already had junior high, and they're like, we're going back there in a couple years,
right?
Get
to go. When are we going to go?
I want my turn. Yeah. So they're excited about going.
Yeah. So it should be a good summer because we have that trip. And then I think VBS, so a lot of our students, young adults help in that. And then the week after that, the Mexico trip, we have a few young adults going to that as well.
And we just got a group of people that just came back from Forest Springs, right?
Yep.
For the first mission trip.
Yep. So 3 total trips this year. June will be a little more low key, but then July ramps up, and there's stuff happening literally every week. So it should be really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Nope. It's awesome.
You got anything else, man?
No, I think, the one thing that I'm excited about, as we're talking about these mission trips and praying for people, I just want to give a shout out one more time. When our junior high went on their fall retreat, we had like this prayer time, and the people were able to sign up and be part of that. And man, like I'm like, maybe we should do something like that with some of these trips where we take and build that in, where people could come alongside, right? Because you either go or you send. It's one of the two. And so have our sending people taken and actually dedicate, hey, I'm going to pray in these times. But I just love the emphasis on prayer that Edgewood has right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely ramping up.
Yeah.
What do you guys got planned for youth group tonight?
So we're changing the series for this summer. We're launching it off actually tonight, and we're talking about some of the biblical truths behind some of these Bible stories. And so we're going to talk about the reality of what was actually going on. So tonight I'm going to tackle with David and Goliath. But with the Bible story shows David as this little boy, and he really was not, right? Like, he was a warrior even in that moment. But you were looking at the future and we're like, what about Noah? And the reality, like, what did it actually look like? The reality of
not just a boat with a bunch of little animals
with the giraffe head sticking out.
So happy and excited to be on there.
But what was going on in the rest of the world in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've got to speak. You asked before, how do we meet this generation? We've got to take and show them that these aren't stories, but this is truth. And so even with Goliath, I was digging in, and I'm like there's examples of people built just like Goliath. Like, he wasn't this anomaly of a man, but there's other people that had the same structure that he had. And so we can sit and understand that Scripture is true.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's logical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So that's what we're going to tackle this summer.
That sounds good.
And hopefully some sane volleyball.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That should be a nice night.
I'm hoping.
All right.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for the Edgewood 4G podcast. So whether you're just listening on or watching this on Facebook or YouTube, we appreciate you engaging with us. And do us a favor, share this with someone. Leave us a rating and review. We really want to ramp this up to get it out to more people. Share it with your friends, family, neighbors, whoever. And especially if there's someone that's working through stuff with teenagers, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, if this would be helpful for them to hear, please share that. But thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.